Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It's May the 17th, day 137, and we are in 2 Samuel chapter 16. That goes over into chapter 17, a few verses, but most of it comes from chapter 16. And there's a lot to talk about here, so let me just read a couple of the verses. It says, "Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushathite, Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said, 'Long live the king, long live the king.'" So let me just tell you that by this point, Absalom has come back to try to take the throne from David. So there's this conflict going on there. And Absalom said to Hushai, "So this is the love you show your friend. If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him?" So David had a confidant. For short, they call him Hushai here. And Absalom accuses him of being disloyal. In your mind, what constitutes disloyalty?
I mean, I think here he's referring to the fact that he considered him a friend of his father, and now that he is supposed to become king, he's turned his back on David, and he just wants to be with whoever's king, is what it seems like. So, I mean, I guess that would mean that you're just following the tide as opposed to being true to somebody, regardless of the circumstances.
Okay.
Yeah, we see that sometimes with political candidates, or even parties, who's, quote, in power. We see it with sports teams. But to address your question, to be loyal, or what is disloyalty, I think is to not be who we have proclaimed ourselves to be. A friend, they use the term here, David's friend. And obviously, for Absalom, He's thinking, you can't be both. You can't be loyal to him and to me, because there's a huge rift and division here. And I think you're right. There's some insecurity or questions on his part. Now you're claiming to be my friend, or he could be spying. You could be trying to get inside information for David. And so there's a lot of question going on here between Absalom and him.
Yeah. So his response is, "I'm going to be loyal to whoever God puts in charge." That's his response, which might be right. That might be the right thing to do.
It could be the right thing to do, and I see it more as he's selling Absalom a line here. Saying, "Oh, God's put you in charge. You're the next man, so I'm going to be over here and be with you." So are there times when our loyalty should change based on God's leading and direction for a person or organization?
Boy, God's leading is so fuzzy.
Yeah.
It's hard. That one's a little bit more difficult. I know a lot of people who are sticklers about loyalty. Like but they define it so narrowly. My view of loyalty is probably somewhat more broad. Provided there is not immorality involved, I expect you to stick with it. When we make a decision, even if we disagree, we're going. Now, if there's no immorality involved, and I'm unwilling to change, I think you have a right to walk away. It may not be the right thing to do. You may need to stick by those people. I've stuck by people who, but at least from a leadership, I'm speaking, I'm not talking about general friendships, but from a leadership standpoint, the things I would consider to be disloyal would have to do, I don't like you, and I'm gonna do everything I can to, or I don't like what you're doing, so I'm gonna try to ruin what you're doing. That I consider to be disloyal. Loyalty to me is, we're all in this together. If we have to build water together, we'll build water together. but I'm not going to intentionally sink the ship so you can suffer, you know.
Yeah, I don't think true loyalty can actually be measured until there is difference of opinions, or when there are hardships or trials to come up, you know, whether it's in work relationship, leadership, church, marriages, whatever the case may be. Because I think it's in those times and seasons that loyalty is actually tested and or displayed.
Yeah, I think the places where leadership gets sideways is when we demand compliance and agreement when it's not necessary.
Yeah, and so often, you know, a person may be on the same page with you and be in agreement with 95%, and then that one issue, that one thing, and too often we see divisions take place where it becomes disloyalty over the issue rather than looking at the bigger picture and just agreeing to disagree on a particular issue and moving on for the greater cause.
Cheryl, you have any insight?
It makes me think of church divisions, you know, or even individuals who decide to leave a church over what seems like a trivial issue, when I wonder if they're thinking about, like Jay said, the other 95% of things that they have agreed with that are the more important issues.
And often I've seen people put themselves in positions where they satisfied that 5% somewhere else, but hated the other 95%, but were so miserable then they couldn't change. You know, they wouldn't swallow their pride. So he goes on, and Absalom asked his advisor, Ahithophel, give us your advice, what should we do? And Ahithophel answered, sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in sight of all of Israel. Well, there's a couple of things I want to say here. It says that's going to make him obnoxious. That seems a little bit more than obnoxious to me. Two, this is almost pornographic.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, we're going to put up a tent so everybody can see.
Yeah. This is
tell me what
this is disloyalty to the nth degree, run amok, because as you stated earlier, it's difference in having difference of opinions, even if you feel strongly about it. But here, now the action has gone to the point where they want to shame, embarrass David, and it even says here through the text that they want to create a division, a line so distinct among the people that they're like, okay, this guy, he's the man. We got to get him behind him because, you know, he's, I start to say courageous enough, he's stupid enough to do these things. And so Absalom has already been disloyal to his father previously. And here we see just a progression of things that he takes some actions and is engaged in some behavior that you're just like, what in the world is he thinking? But I think it points out the danger of disloyalty. Sometimes that pendulum begins to swing, that sometimes it goes so far over that you get to a place where you're like, how did this even happen? When it started with one simple choice or decision way back.
Gerald?
I read that this was a sign that, you know, when somebody was trying to take over somebody's position, this was something that was typical.
They took their women.
Yeah, to happen, which, I mean, I guess makes sense because they're trying to fill the palace with their bloodline now, as opposed to the person who was, you know, originally in charge.
Yeah, Jay, you talked about the concept of the pendulum swinging, and Cheryl, earlier you talked about church, people leaving churches or church splits because somebody doesn't like something. The thing I've seen the most is that often people do leave churches over something that is so insignificant that they're ashamed to tell it. Mm. They're ashamed to say, I left because they took the Bible out, the family Bible off the table, or
moved
they don't
the piano on the stage.
Yeah, or they took our hymn books out. You know, they don't want to tell anybody that, so they make stuff up to try to make it sound dramatic, and they start telling stuff that's not true because they feel like they've got to go to some extreme.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough for Absalom to take over the palace. He had something he wanted to prove. Yeah, he is going to make this as bad as he possibly can.
So I think that it begs the question of, had David taken care of this situation with Tamar from the beginning, would have ever gotten
The
to this
answer is
point
yes.
with
The answer,
Absalom?
the answer to that question is yes.
I think that's why he's so mad. He says, you know, I'm sure deep inside he feels like my father was the king and then allowed this to happen within his own household and chose not to deal with it. And so he probably sees him as really weak.
Yeah.
And a reason to be.
So in a sense, he felt like David had been disloyal to Tamar.
Sure.
And so now he's disloyal to David, his father, and it just becomes a vicious cycle.
So verse 23 says, now in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded Ahithophel's advice. So he apparently was wise. Ahithophel was David's advisor. He becomes Absalom's advisor. Ahithophel's the one that advises him to sleep with the people, the concubines, on the roof of the palace. Does this seem like godly advice to you?
No.
So how do you distinguish? If somebody you've trusted to give you godly advice suddenly comes in with something and they've been right, and then they tell you to do something and it seems so out of the ordinary, and you go, so how do you distinguish?
I think there's a multitude of ways. I think first of all, in your own spirit, you know, there has to be something that checks that. That's like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, doesn't look right, isn't right. You know, let's talk about this. It is more difficult when you've got a history. I think when people you've trusted, they have given you sound advice for such a long period of time. They've got a track record in place, and but I don't think we should just because of that just assume that their advice is spot on for that time, because
Cheryl?
I think particularly in Absalom's situation, which is true for us too, this was probably what he wanted to hear. So this wasn't like some big sacrifice he was going to have to make, you know, to go sleep with all these women.
It was just
Oh man, what
Yeah. I know. So he's like, oh yeah, that is a good idea. I think you're right.
He said a word from the Lord.
That sounds godly to
Yeah.
me.
Thus saith the Lord,
I mean,
right?
it's true for us too when
Yeah.
we're wanting permission to do something.
We
that
seek
know
out
we should
people that
do.
will tell us what
That's
we want
right.
to hear.
Good point.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And there are people who I believe give me godly advice, but there are some things I won't listen to them about because they're so deep in it. It's their blind spot and they can't see it, or they're been so injured by something that they can't be realistic about it. I know to discount it, but sometimes when it's our desire, when that's what we want, you know, oh yeah, that sounds like a great thing. So when it gets into chapter 17, it says, Ahithophel said to Absalom, I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed. Ahithophel's giving advice to kill the king. I wonder why he didn't give this advice to David to deal with Amnon. Just curious. Because you mentioned earlier, if he had dealt with Amnon, we don't have this situation. If Ahithophel believed you deal with the issue, or do you think this was a power play on Ahithophel's part?
We don't know that he didn't suggest that to David. I mean,
That's true.
You know, as we've discussed, David's track record with his family is kind of
Sketchy.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do anything to rock the boat.
Yeah, very well may be. he sees the opportunity, just like the previous guy had done. This is my opportunity. He currently is the king, and so I'm going to tell him things that are going to position him to secure this permanently, and therefore I'm going to secure a place for me permanently, as well as his trusted advisor.
Yeah, Absalom doesn't reject this advice. The truth is, it's the wise advice. If you kill the king, everybody else is going to follow
Yeah, that
you.
part of it's true. Yeah.
I mean, that's
a
the
given.
truth of it.
Yeah.
If you're going to be king, you got to kill the other king. I mean, that's my argument about David. If you're going to be the king, the other king's got to go. And until the other king goes, you're just in competition with him. And that's kind of the way I see it. But Absalom, it says, this plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. So the people of Israel, who were just a few days before following David, right? Does this bother you as a leader that people can move on that fast?
Shift that quickly. Yeah, it does.
It's not surprising, though.
It's not surprising, but it's bothersome because it makes you wonder. When we're talking about loyalty, how loyal people are, not just to the sense of you individually, but to the purpose and the cause for which you're trying to lead people. If they will switch over that quickly, go from 1 minute we're defending him, we're willing to die, and now we say, yep, go ahead and kill him and take him out. It appears to me, and I don't want to be trite here, but it seems almost like the political scene a lot of times, that people are moved by public opinion and by popular opinion polls, and vacillate back and forth. And these elders and leaders of Israel obviously are vacillating based on current circumstances rather than what is the long-term objective here? What is the best decision here?
Cheryl, how do you see that? Does it bother you that people can move on that fast?
It does, but at the same time, you have to wonder, how are they going to best serve in this situation? Are these elders and leaders going to be better off to stand by David and get killed? Or are they going to be better off to give good advice to the person that is now trying to be in charge? I don't know. I mean, I don't. What's at the heart of their motivation? Is it truly because they want for him to be a good leader to the people?
Yeah,
or
are they
is
trying
it
to?
because
Yeah.
they just want to be with whoever's in power?
Yeah, the thing I would say, one, having been around church all my life, when the previous guy's gone, people forget really quick. We're on to the next guy. But there's two reasons for that, and we can see that in nations. We can see that in families. The two things people typically want is they want to be led, so they need direction, and they want peace. And if we've got a leader and it's going to be peaceful, we're going to go in that direction. If it's going to require a constant conflict, constant fight, and if we always, we got to resist, it's amazing how quickly people forget. And some of it has to do with, I think you're right, their role. I mean, if they're going to be a good elder, ever who the king is they've got to support that person.
Like if you left the church, would you want everybody that's in leadership to leave
No.
with you, or do you want for them to stay behind and do a good job?
Support the next guy.
Yeah, I agree with that, but you got to look at the situation for why he left and how he left. And we have the privilege of looking and knowing this is God's guy.
Right.
And that all this is not going in a good direction currently.
Good. Any other ideas, thoughts about this passage that stuck out to you want to mention before we close?
Only that when you read on, you will see, how did you pronounce his name?
Hushai.
Yeah,
Sound like you're speaking in
that
tongues.
he did. Careful. That he did. He did take a stand and say, guys, wait a minute. I don't think this is right.
Right.
It's not sound advice. And he kind of changed the course of that. In the midst of all this momentum that had shifted toward Absalom, he did say, no, this is a good decision. We need to reconsider the plan of action here.
All right. Let's close in prayer. Jay, do you mind closing us in prayer?
Lord, we thank you for the truth of your word and for reminding us of the importance of loyalty. May we always be, first of all, loyal to you. May we be loyal to others that we serve with. And when we have disagreements with each other, whether it be in our personal relationships or inside the church or our work or whatever it may look like, may we find a way to resolve those, to work through those and look at the bigger picture and what you're trying to accomplish in and through our lives. And may we be faithful to do that to your glory and honor. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.